Hello, hello. We'll let everyone stream in. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll let everyone slowly make their way in. We'll give it another 2 to 3 minutes and then we can jump straight in. But I appreciate you all for taking time, maybe over lunch, to speak with us. Welcome in, welcome in. Got about 150 people in. I'll let it stream up a little bit more and then we can get stuck in. Maybe for some interactivity while we wait, feel free to send a quick message in the chat where you're dialing in from. I'll kick us off. Cool. I think let's get stuck in. We've got about 180 people in the room. Maybe some quick intro. Taking time, we'll make this as jam-packed with information as possible. Encourage you to send messages into the chat as well. We won't be able to get to all of them, but we'll be able to kind of handpick some themes to speak to. Quick intro, I'm Jesse. I look after our North American team here at Heidi Health and have been with Heidi pretty much since the start, hence the Aussie accent. I'll pass it over to Ishan to do a quick intro as well.
Hey everybody, I'm Ishan. I work closely with Jesse, but I'm not from Australia originally, hence the American accent. But I did used to live there for a few years. But yeah.
Awesome. And yeah,
it looks like chat's disabled.
Yeah, I just noted that. Thanks for flagging. I think today the goal is to really leave you with a few things. So we understand that deeply into the weeds from A to Z though. So starting from the very basics and kind of gradually making our way into more complex concepts. If you were to walk away with 5 or so things from this, we want it to be the following 5. We want you to grasp the syntax, grasp the way a template is actually formatted, how to use the language of a Heidi template. Health, non-clinical staff, pretty much everything far and wide between. And again, the beauty of these templates is that it can adapt to that use case. The whole gambit. Then we also want to focus on how you can use templates to help some of the non-clinical types of things that you do. So once a session is done, the referral letters, the patient summaries, the discharge letters, all the things that also take up time. We want to talk about how to create a template without necessarily having to start from scratch. We want to tell you and give you the information required to start from scratch. But where you don't have the time or where you want something that's kind of, Pareto principle, 80% good with 20% of the work, we also want to show you how you can get that sort of output. And then finally, something a little bit more complex, but something that I think is fantastically useful is the ability to use templates to refer or to make use of the context tab in Heidi, which for some people in the room, you may not actually know exists, but it is a really powerful way to give Heidi information and equip Heidi with more data outside of what is discussed in the consultation. So,
Jesse, just so
go
you
ahead.
know, it seems to be all right in the past couple of minutes, but your video was cutting in and out. So be mindful of that. We will send a recording though, just so everybody knows in case it continues. But it seems to be okay, but just flagging it.
All right. Yeah. Flag away if things go awry. All righty. You can see my screen all good?
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. So this is Heidi. I'm sure some of you are all very familiar with this. I wanted to start everything by going through the syntax of Heidi and the syntax of a template. And in order to do that, I'm going to pick a very basic style of note. We're going to go into a tonsillitis style session. I'm going to apply a soap note, Heidi soap note to this template. And again, you'd all be fairly familiar with this. I'm going to give it a few seconds. Maybe if that doesn't play nice with me, then I can jump into something else. There we go. All right. So Heidi's generated a very basic note. There's a 40-second session, so very basic. But what I wanted to go through is what actually makes Heidi write in a certain way, right? Why does Heidi include subjective at the top and the specific things about objective and all these different pieces? It's all to do with this language, right? And so when you're in the template editor, you can always refer to these sort of set of things over here, these sets of syntactical instructions, but I want to spend a bit of time to go through them now. So really there's 2 or 3 main things that are important to remember in terms of syntax. There's headings, placeholders, and instructions. Now I intentionally skipped verbatim for a reason. I'll come back to that, but really headings, placeholders, and instructions. Headings are exactly what you think. Anywhere you see plain text, that is basically telling Heidi, these are the kind of the foundations, these are the facade that we're going to build Heidi on top of, right? So we've got subjective, past medical, objective, assessment plan. And when you look at the note, subjective, objective, assessment plan, there's a few sections missing, and I'll show you why that is the case, but we're giving Heidi that high level structure of how to write a note. Maybe I want to be very specific in here and I want to add in a family history section, right? Maybe one thing I might want to do. I might even want to come down here and add a coding billing section, right? All these different sections I can add. I can also use this concept of kind of plain text headings to write any headers or footers that I might want to include. So I might do Jesse Crichton, here's my provider number, right? So anywhere I've got this plain text, Heidi is just going to copy this as if it's a constant that stays consistent from note to note. Then the next thing, which is probably the most important thing to take away, is this concept of placeholders. Placeholders is, to use Aussie lingo, the meat and potatoes of the template, right? It is where Heidi pulls from its backlog of data and information and things that were discussed in the consult to give you a very precise and a very specific thing out of the note. So under the subjective heading, we're telling Heidi to, using square brackets, mention the reason for visit, the chief complaints and symptoms. We're doing this in totally natural language. You don't have to talk to Heidi in a specific way. You don't have to use specific words. You can be very imprecise and almost intentionally imprecise so that Heidi then sifts through everything to find the reason for visits, to find the chief complaints and all the associated information. Down here in past medical, we're telling Heidi to mention contributing factors, mention any social history, exposure history. You can, again, be very specific with what you want to elucidate. Back to these 2 new sessions that I've just, sections that I've included here. Under my family history, I might want Heidi to include relevant history around direct relatives. For instance, parents, siblings, children, or other. I might also want to include a section in here that is telling Heidi, maybe include any significant family events in the last 5 to 10 years, right? Again, very specific things, which, as I kind of go through this, I'd be thinking about when summary to find in order to write inside the note. That's the same sort of instruction that you want to give to Heidi, right? So I'm now going to come in here to coding billing, tell Heidi to include ICD-10 codes and CPT codes based on the visit, right? So Heidi is also capable of including codes, sort of ICD, CPT, some other ones that Ashan will show later. But that's another example of a placeholder piece of information where Heidi is searching through the conversation that was had and including pertinent information. The last thing I want to show, and then we can move on to some examples, is the idea of instructions. Instructions are for the artistic brain inside all of you to give sort of very specific stylistic instructions about how this note is formatted. A few examples you'll see in here are things like only include if explicitly mentioned. So if Heidi doesn't hear that session, it's actually going to leave that piece of information and completely omit it. Could also tell Heidi to do things like write the subjective section in paragraph format, not bullet points, right? Maybe down here in our family history, I want Heidi to write any significant events in chronological order. All these stylistic instructions that maybe don't necessarily matter so much for the content, but really matter in how much time you have to spend editing afterwards. That's what we've included these instructions for, right? And so to take away from all of this, we've added in some new sections using our headings. We've included some additional placeholder information. So now every time we apply this template, Heidi's going to include relevant family history. And then it's also going to write in the format that we want. It's going to write our subjective section in paragraph format. It's going to write our family history issues in chronological order. So I'm going to call this, maybe let's call it Ishan custom note. And I'm now going to save that, log it away, or I can apply it to my current session. Now, obviously, this is a very brief session, so it may not be fantastic. But you can see in here, the subjective section is now written, not in bullet points, but if in sort of paragraph or sentence format. Family history now exists as a section. Objective is normal as it was before. Acute tonsillitis is included. We've elucidated the specific ICD-10 code associated with that visit. And it's also done my little sign off down the bottom. So I wanted to kind of give that to you all. I know for some that's kind of table stakes, but for others, this is kind of the ground with which you build a lot of that template smarts on top of, to now for us to go in and show off how to then use some of these templates. So I wanted to quickly, before we show some examples, also just talk about how you might create a template. And in order to do that, we have to show you how the language works. So now you can come into your template library and create a template from scratch. But that's a little bit daunting, right? There's a lot to go through. You have these big complex notes. You might not want to start from scratch. And so there's two really useful things that you can do to get Heidi to help you create your templates from. So the first way is being able to take an existing note that you have from your medical record, from Heidi even, something that you've edited and that you're really happy with. And you can give that to Heidi for Heidi to then turn into a structured template. So I'm going to go through looking for a good example. Here's an example in ADHD style note, kind of a basic SOAP note. But let's say I'm very happy with this template. I'm going to copy this template. I'm going to go into my template library. I'm going to start from an existing note, and I get prompted here to paste in an existing note. So this could be anything. It could be for a basic clinical assessment. It could be for in this case, a bit more sort of mental health. It can be anything, and it can include actual specifics from the patient encounter. But what Heidi's going to do is take the abstract structure and turn it into a template for you. So you can see in here, we've kind of got a SOAP style note, but the problem is that it's got all the patient-specific details. It's got some tests in here, right? Very specific. I'm going to tell Heidi, all right, take this and try and do your best to create a rough sort of abstracted sort of template structure out of it. And Heidi's going to go away. Might take a little second. Then Heidi will create and stream out an example template that reflects the nature of that actual structure. And it will probably not be perfect. It's hard for Heidi to, intuit all of the decision making that went into writing a note, but Heidi will do its best to be able to do this. And so you can see here. So Heidi's taken that previous note I just showed. It knows that the first heading is subjective, talking about different things about being distracted, hyperactivity, staying on task. It's a very specific behavioral health style template. Past medical, it's going through birth, developmental, family history. In the objective, it's going through all of those scores that and so this gives you a great launch pad to then, okay, there are a few scores that I didn't include in that template, but I do want Heidi to consider. I can go in and copy the structure here and add those as additional things. assessment. It's talking about ADHD. So it's been very precise and very specific. And so this is one way that you can create a note, right? I can then save that as Ishan template 2, save that for later. And then next time I see a patient, I can apply it. The one other way that is really useful to create templates from your own kind of internal structure is you can use this little, pink ball. This is, the amorphous manifestation of Heidi, to basically tell Heidi how you want a note structured. So again, maybe to use a behavioral health example again, I can tell Heidi to create a DAP note with the subjective section written in narrative paragraphs, include ICD-10 and CPT codes for each diagnosis, and start with a 2-sentence summary of the visit and next steps. So kind of a high-level abstract outline of how I want this note to be structured. But you can see in here, it started off with a brief summary of the visit outline and the next steps for the patient. It's telling Heidi to only include it based on the next steps. The data section is being, I'll let it stream out and then I'll go through each section. So Heidi knew what DAP meant contextually. Heidi was able to, talk about it in a very paragraph narrative way. Patient presented with, describe current issues. It's going through reasons for visit. It's going through, the patient has a past medical history of, describe past medical history. And so that's another way that you can get Heidi to create a note that you want. If you don't have a particularly complex note, but you have a few things here and there that you want Heidi to do in a specific way, this is another example, right? One final little bonus way to get a template that you like is to steal the templates of the wonderful people in our template community. There's probably thousands in here now. You can filter by location, by specialty. I'm going to go to the US. Maybe we've got some urology ones down here from David Keynes, right? I might come in here, see the structure that has been created by this other user. You can see chief complaints, HPI today, physical exam, assessment and plan. And then I can also see what it looks like when it's applied. We've got this example note section here. I can then just take this straight off the library, add it to my library, and then go away and customize it as I see fit as well. So those are a few little examples there. I encourage you to go to the community for inspiration, regardless of your specialty. Even look beyond just the US. There's some great examples in Australia or Canada or the UK. Take the ones that look really good, customize them as you need, but it's a really great place to start. And so, hopefully from this first 20 minutes, you take away the syntax that's required and how you can get started with your own templates. But with that as the backdrop, I'm going to throw it over to Ishan now to give us a few data points or a few examples of the weird and wonderful ways that you can use a template. Now, we won't specifically probably talk about everyone's specialty in here, but hopefully we'll cover off enough ground to where you can see how it might be really valuable for yourself.
Yeah, and a lot of these things as well, like the concepts can be applied regardless of specialty. Some of the exact examples I show might pertain to a specialty, but the actual concepts in the template you can utilize yourselves. Before I dive in to some more advanced templates, it's important to note, and I think I saw a couple things in the chat, that if you're using really advanced, robust custom templates, you want to make sure that you're on Left Brain. Left Brain, we've designed to basically adhere more to template instructions, whereas Right Brain can be more creative, and that's done by design. Like it's explicitly stated here as well. So just make sure if you're diving into the realm of super custom templates that you're utilizing Left Brain, and you'll see the best results that way. Just a couple examples that I'll show you. This is a mock conversation that Jesse and I did a few days ago about just like pretending to have basically eczema. So just know that that's the context of this visit, which I'll show you a few notes off of. This first one is this is probably one of the more advanced ones that I've ever created. So it's a super detailed in the weeds template, which is specifically designed for an emergency doctor originally. But the idea being that you can see here, there's a pretty detailed physical exam with normal statements as well. Normal statements meaning that you don't necessarily have to go through this entire, physical exam. It'll just say things by default if you so chose to. But But then you have like the MDM summary, right? So there's differentials, there's independent historians. And then if you scroll down to the bottom, you can see here there's, heart score if somebody comes in with, chest pain. Obviously, that's not the case here. But you'll also go into number and complexity of problems addressed per like the AMA criteria, complexity of data, so on and so forth. So what you'll see here is it's super, super complex, but I'll start with some of the basics, right? So somebody also asked about how to not use a patient's name. If you just give it this instruction at the top, which says do not use the patient's name throughout the entire note, only use the relevant pronouns, or just write the patient, then Heidi won't actually reference, my name, Ishan, in this note. What you can see here is broken down, like Jesse referred to originally, all of these super, super precise things like pertinent medical history, allergies, so on and so forth. So what I'll do here is I'll hit save and use, and you can sort of see how Heidi will fill it in based on this mock conversations of 3.5 minutes. So you can also basically use it to help you with your E&M and your coding. A lot of this will be blank because, again, it's not the most detailed fake conversation, but you should hopefully get the idea here. And you can see here the complexity scores as well and risk scores. So that's one that I've done in the past. What I've also done is you can do dual notes. So this obviously isn't an example indicative of that, but say you see multiple family members at one time, you can actually make a note for those specific circumstances in Heidi such that you're not having to create a new session every single time. So what I've done up here and what you can also use the parentheses for is a bit of like context setting for Heidi, whereby you give it the context of the upcoming visit. That way the AI is able to better distinguish, okay, this is what's going on while I generate this note. I will say the one caveat for, doing multiple people is you can do more than 2, but you can't do more than 5. So I've made this patient 1 and 2, but you can only really go up to a maximum of 5 patients is what I would say. What you can see here is next to every single header, I've included this instruction that says only include details in this section that are relevant for the first patient, patient 1. And then I do that next to every single header. Next to the objective, I refer to patient 1. And then when I go to patient 2, I say the same thing, but in reference to patient 2 as well. The best way that I found it for consistency's sake to keep track of who patient 1 and patient 2 is to go and leverage that context tab. So all I'll literally type in is patient 1 equals Ishan, patient 2 equals Jesse. And now Heidi knows from the context of the conversation what to attribute to which person. The other thing I'll show you, and then the context tab, is you can also utilize Heidi for progress notes. This exact example was done for an inpatient setting, but you can utilize the same construct for any progress note that you might have with a patient that you continuously see, right? So I have clinical course, I have today's updates. Heidi will insert the date in the US format, and then it'll just go through all these things that you've briefly discussed. The way to leverage this progress note really ties into what you can do in the context tab. So within the context tab, you're able to give Heidi basically, well, context, exactly what it sounds like. There's a few ways in which you can do that. So you can actually upload documents that you might have been sent about the patient's health history, or say, they were sent for labs or tests. You can upload those results here and by clicking this attachment field and then uploading that document. The other thing you could potentially do is you can just copy and paste information in here, right? So what I've done previously, and you can just make a note directly from the context tab as well. But for the sake of this example, here's some fake data that I'll put into Heidi on cardiovascular testing. And then what I can hit here is I can hit create note from context directly. So say you're handed, heaps and heaps of pages. Imagine this was, 10, 20 pages long of health history, and you just wanted Heidi to summarize that quickly. You can create a template in Heidi, and you can just have it summarize the information that you put into the context tab. So if I hit create note from context, I'll hit this note, chronological procedures, and Heidi will then produce a note based off of all of that like past health information. And it'll create it nice and clean here. And you can do that for your specialty depending on the kind of information you would want Heidi to summarize. from all this health information. I know there's a lot of questions.
Yeah, I think one good one that you briefly touched on, Ishan, that maybe to go a bit more in depth on is the ability for Heidi to pass out two different speakers. We've got a few people that are talking about in sort of a family med setting, in a pediatric setting. But just to double click on that and show how, if given the right instructions, a Heidi template can really create whatever style output you want, including, in this example, a dual SOAP note.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, this can go up to, confidently, I can say 5 people. When I've tested it on like 10 people, it kind of loses its ability to be accurate. But there's a couple specific things that I've done here, right? So I've given Heidi the context of what this visit is, right? I've said this is a multiple patient visit with one clinician, which would be yourself, and multiple patients. Make sure you differentiate between them so you can follow the note accurately. And then what I've done, and we can share this again so that you maybe have a good example to work off of. I haven't done anything like too niche here or too wild. What I've just done is I've taken the base SOAP note that you have by default in your Heidi library, and I've added these individual instructions next to every single header or subsection of the note. So next to the subjective, I've added this. Next to the objective, I've added this. Next to the assessment and plan, I've added these things. What this says is a specific instruction to Heidi in the parentheses, which says to only include these details that are relevant to patient 1. And I've done the same thing for patient 2. You can do the same thing for patient 3, 4, and 5. And all you would do is you would change this aspect from patient to patient to say, patient 2, patient 3, patient 4. If you don't want to, you don't necessarily have to have patient 2 and say the name of the second patient. What I do recommend you doing, just so Heidi is immediately aware of what each patient is or who each patient is I would go in here again and I would type in quite literally, patient 1 equals Jesse. And I wrote that right. Patient 2 equals Ishan. Patient 3 equals Olivia. Patient 4 equals Arthur. Right. And that way, before Heidi's going to have to go through and make that note, it already has all of this context from what you've put in here, but also what that initial instruction is from the actual template in the first line you see here. Right. So the way it basically works is Heidi will view this line first and it'll view the context first. And now it knows, okay, between those two things, this is how I'm going to go and make that note.
Awesome. Cool. I'm going to still reclaim the screen.
No worries.
Be so kind. And just to maybe tie off a few other loose ends, clinical encounter part of Heidi. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And so a few other things that I think are quite important for a clinical encounter, and that's both medical, non-medical, behavioral health. There's kind of across all these mediums, there's reviews of system, mental state exam, physical exam, these things that happen where we kind of in our head or even in the EMR have a set of normal statements, but then depending on what happens when I physically examine you, what happens when we do the MSE, things will change about how I want to word certain sections. And so what I want to do is quickly show off another use case of templates, which is the ability to do those kinds of exams in a really elegant way. So this is an example template. Now this is in a medical context, but again, this works in an allied, in a behavioral health style context. We have in our physical exam, a bunch of different sections, a bunch of different systems. We've got constitutional, eyes, nose, mouth, throat, so on, so on. And you'll see that there's a smattering of different instructions in here. You've got in here for the constitutional section, I'm telling Heidi to include any findings. So this is almost the same as me saying include findings. Just include anything you hear me speak about that relates to the constitutional section. If we do not explicitly mention that, then I want you to print not examined, right? So that's one example of how I might use that Heidi syntax to write very specifically for one system. But then down here, another example is maybe for the extremities. Again, Heidi, listen for any abnormals, listen for any findings. But if we didn't mention anything, or if we just said normal, I want you to print this very specific statement, no edema, right? Same with psychiatric. There's kind of levels of sophistication and almost, you can think about it like an if-then statement. if this happens, then I want you to do this, please, Heidi. And that can be different. The if can be whether or not it's discussed. The then can be whether you want it to include a very specific normal statement, whether you want Heidi to completely omit the section altogether if we don't talk about it, or even if you wanted Heidi to say something like not examined. There's full flexibility in how that is used, right? So just to show you how that looks in practice, I'm going to start a new session. And again, I'd make a horrible doctor, so nobody quiz me on this. But thanks, Ishan, for coming in. Yeah, I'm just going to do a quick physical. Yep. Okay, I'm looking in the back of your throat there. I can see some erythema there and on the right side, some white exudates there as well. Looks a bit gnarly down there. I'm just going to press on your neck, Ishan. Oh, yeah, okay. On that same side on the right, I can feel your tonsils are really, they're huge at the moment. They're what we call 2+. They're quite inflamed. Just taking a look, your lungs sound fine. You look fine. You don't have a fever. I am actually noting there, Ishan, on your left eye, you've got a bit of a buildup of conjunctivitis, which is a bit odd. So I'm just going to note that down. But like I said, other than that, you seem pretty fine. Yep. All right, so then I'm going to finish that session. And obviously that little snippet would be part of a greater conversation. I'm going to apply this template to the session that we've just done. And Heidi is going to do the work of listening to all the abnormals that were spoken out loud, including them in the relevant section, but then doing all the things we told it to do for the sections that were not discussed. So constitutional, we wanted it to say not examined if we didn't discuss it. Conjunctiva right is normal, but left, there's conjunctivitis noted. Pupils, we didn't mention them, but we wanted this section to write normal, right? Instead of not examined. Really, there's any kind of flexibility you want in here. Nose, mouth, and throat, we've got erythema, white exudates on the right side. Everything else is normal. Oropharynx inflamed. My neck exam, right tonsils enlarged 2+ and inflamed, right? So that you can hopefully abstract that sort of concept of almost information mapping more broadly across MSEs or across reviews of system or really anywhere where there's a set of normals where you have specific abnormals that are discussed. Now, how to use this in practice really depends on your style as a clinician. You could, like we've just done there, talk about all the abnormals with the patient, but I'm also cognizant that in behavioral health settings or even in like an allied setting like occupational therapy, physical therapy, you may not actually necessarily enunciate everything that you're observing. So one thing that you can do in a very common use case is once the patient's left the room, you can come back in and resume this session. So let's say Ishan's left the room, but I then wanted to make maybe a comment on let's say his psychiatric appearance, because that was a section that we've told to exclude, but I'm going to tell Heidi. Also, just for my physical exam, yeah, Ishan's mood was quite strange. He had a very negative affect. I'm a bit worried about his history of bipolar disorder, and so I wanted to note that down as well. Now that's a joke. Ishan is very nice. Don't worry. But now Heidi is going to add that additional little nodule of information back into the relevant section in the physical exam sort of thing here. So I'll make sure that shows, and I hope I picked the right template for that to include. You can even see in here, right? Heidi's now included that in the psych review of systems. And in here, where we didn't have a psychiatric system before, we now do. And we've told Heidi to, include that section only when it's heard. So a few little there of sort of clinical use cases for this. I saw a few questions in the chat about context, which we briefly sort of skimmed over, but I just wanted to double down on that. For those who maybe aren't aware of what the context section is, before you start a session with a patient, you have this context window here that's kind of like a live dumping ground, for lack of a better term, for any information that isn't going to come out in the consult. So think, for the medicos in the room, think of the labs and the vitals and the referral letters and things like that you get ahead of seeing a patient, right? You might want to paste them in here. You might want to upload them. You can upload images, PDFs, Word documents, really anything. And Heidi will then capture that as context prior to the session. For the behavioral health or the allied health people in the room, you can also use this for follow-ups, right? So I can go back to maybe a previous session. Let's say I grab this fake Ishan's session about his tonsillitis and his negative affect. Maybe Ishan comes back 2 days later. He hasn't gotten better. We put him on amoxicillin, but he's not improving. I might then paste the previous note in here. And then when Ishan walks in, Heidi actually has the context of what happened last session, right? Which is really critically important for focusing on the deltas. How is his change? What are the deltas? All those sorts of things. And so this kind of, think about it as just a context ground. The name is very apt. It's any context you want Heidi to have prior to a session. You use this as a kind of grounds for that. We've also just released the ability to then create total notes out of the context section, where now you don't actually have to do a visit to create an output. And that's what Ishan showed previously, where you might have this constellation of vitals and labs and referring info and stuff from the record, and the nurse did all these things, right? And you might have to spend 20, 30 minutes, tying that all together, writing a really elegant summary of the patient. You can now use Heidi as that assistant to dump information from various different sources, various different form factors, and then just tell Heidi to create the note from context. I've got a little example in here just to show off, but here's I've just uploaded a PDF of a nursing case.
Maybe highlight what, because we can't see you click on it. Maybe just put your mouse around what you click on.
Yeah. So I click this little paper clip, and then I can upload documents. And so I've got a sort of nursing intake document here that maybe my nurse has done. I can now create an actual note, either using a template, right? Or just telling Heidi what I want. So maybe I want an admission style note from this visit, right? So I've got an admission note style template, and Heidi's now going to transform all of the information that was in that initial document into the format I want. So that's a quick one on how to use context. So that, I think, is a good cursory view through the clinical use case of Heidi. What happens when you're seeing a patient, when you're in the visit, when you need to create a clinical output based on information prior to the consult, information in the consult, information after the consult. The next thing I wanted to touch on is the non-clinical use cases for this, right? And so you think about all this time you spend documenting, probably a good portion of it is on these notes from the visit notes, the follow-ups, the initial assessments. But what about all the things downstream that patients ask for, or that your staff ask for, that are just as time consuming, but there's really no solution for it right now? You can also use the context of, or sort of the construct of a template to help you create those things. So a few little examples that I want to show off, and I'm actually going to use this. Actually, let's go into, see if I can find a good session. This is the problem about showing Heidi off too much, is we've got too many different sessions. Here's a good example. We're very tonsillitis heavy today, but this is another tonsillitis style session. We've done a 3-minute consult, basic soap note, cool. There's a few things happening in here that also I want to create after the visit. So we've got here, discuss potential for tonsillectomy, right? So we might need to do a referral. We've got follow-up in 1 week. So maybe I want to give the patient some information about when to follow up, how to know if symptoms are getting worse, those sorts of things. Maybe let's say this patient also has, maybe English is their second language. They have a family that speaks Spanish, let's say. I want to also be able to give the family something that is powerful and sort of harness the use case of these templates to then also give the family something that is useful for them. So let's start off with a referral letter template. So I've got in here, let's do, I think I've got, a referral letter style template in here. Now, most of you should have this as a default template in your Heidi. It's a very basic example, but this is something to look at. We're using the same construct of a template using these headings and placeholders and instructions, but this time not to create a clinical note, to create something downstream. So here I'm telling Heidi to write, dear clinician name, if it was mentioned. Thank you for seeing the patient. This patient's name. I'm running to refer them, who is known with medical condition 1, 2, etc. They are currently using medication 1, 2, etc. So Heidi's weaving together this sort of plain text with the actual placeholders of the visit, to where Heidi's going to go through the visit and search for medical conditions. It's going to go through the visit and search medications. It's going to summarize the history of presenting complaint, talk about any allergies, talk about allergies again, it seems in this example, and then a basic sign off, right? So if I wanted to apply this, I'm then going to use this template on the session that we've just done, this tonsillitis session. Heidi knows the context that I'm referring to an ENT. And so Heidi's going to include the things that are relevant for an ENT, right? Dear Dr. Smith, I think that was the name I mentioned in the consult, referring my patient Jessie, who is known with recurrent tonsillitis. These are the things they presented with. Please note they have no allergies. Your expertise would be greatly appreciated, right? This is a very basic template that probably doesn't, suit the style of most of how you guys write your referral letters. But just as an example, this is also how you can get Heidi to write a specific style note. That's one example. Another example that I quickly wanted to show off as well is this, an idea of something that's patient facing, something you can give to the patient that summarizes all the things you discussed. If you're in a allied health setting, here's your exercise plan. Here's your diet plan. If you're in a behavioral health setting, here are our SMART goals for the next couple of weeks. In a medical context, here's the course of medication. Here's how to take it, when to take it, why you should reach out if you should need to, right? Same rules apply. I've got a patient explainer template in here. This is a very basic one. And what I'm basically telling Heidi to do is, okay, start with a 2-sentence summary of the patient's presentation. Then it's going to start with a sort of basic placeholder introductory statement. It was a pleasure seeing you today. Glad we had the chance to discuss your health, so on, so on. You can customize all of this. Then it's got an introduction to the key topics discussed. It's going to start with our conversation today was an important one. We touched upon brackets, describe the specific condition or reason for visit. We also went over, mention diagnostic test procedure. Exercise, this is maybe an example I did for an allied health client. List out any exercises to be completed if discussed, right? I might tell Heidi only include if explicitly mentioned, right? Lifestyle recommendations, providing these lifestyle, list all of the next steps. I won't belabor the point, but you can see that you can really get Heidi to write the exact kind of patient-facing information that you want. And it's all because it's in the context of writing for a patient. It knows to talk about things in a very specific patient-friendly way. It knows all of these nuances. So I'm going to apply this template. And again, we're taking this very basic SOAP note, which was 3 minutes long. We've now created the referral letter for the ENT. We're now creating the patient-facing information for the patient. And so by the time the patient's left the room, you've got the referral letter, you've got the patient-facing information, you've got the note, your job's almost done, right? And this is kind of the power of Heidi and the templates, which really I want you guys to take away today, is that any of the notes or the styles or the things that you're creating, you can get Heidi to create. So you can see in here, it's done a little summary up the top. Dear Jessie, it was a pleasure seeing you today. We touched upon your sore throat, its impact on your breathing, swallowing, eating. We also discussed your history of tonsillitis and that this is more severe than usual. Here's the treatment plan that we've gone through, the lifestyle recommendations. Here are the specific next steps, right? Take the steroids and augment it as directed. Follow up in 1 week. It's included the date for us. Consider the possibility of a tonsillectomy. Reach out if things get worse. And you can see that this is now saved you a bunch of time. But not only that, now the patient has a better understanding of what to do. Their adherence to the plan is going to be a lot better. And they might nag the front desk staff or even yourself a little bit less over time, which is always a positive. So those are some other use cases of templates that I think are really, really powerful. What I might do, Ishan, I'm not sure if there are...
One more thing. For the patient explainer or any note, can you just show them how to export it or send it as an email?
Great point. So after you've got this patient explainer, for instance, you can then hit these 3 dots. You can either export it as a PDF or a Word document, and it will just save it to your computer so that you can upload it or put it in the patient portal, or you can just email it straight to the patient as well. And that email will come from a do not reply address, so they don't have access to your email. It will come from sort of a generic email. But then this is the sort of thing where almost this new magic patient experience where you go and see your doctor or you go and see your psychiatrist or your PT or whoever it might be. And by the time you've left the room, you've got an email on your phone of everything that happened and the nuances of what you discussed. It's quite magical. And so that's really what I want to anchor everyone to. And sort of as we wrap towards the end of this session, think of anything that you spend your time writing or manually creating in your EMR, manually typing. anything that relies on the clinical encounter or the information that was discussed in your consultation, this is where Heidi will shine. The things that we didn't get to discuss today are the mental health ADHD assessment reports that take an hour that you can now do on Heidi, the dietitian's nutrition plan report that you can now do because Heidi has context on the allergies and the preferences and the dietary style, the urologist that does their pre-charting and then pastes all of the information into Heidi, into the context window, and then uses that in collaboration with the nursing staff to create one great patient outcome note. All these things that we didn't explicitly mention, hopefully we've given you enough to kind of let the imagination run free on what's possible. And so I wanted to maybe pause there, unless Ishan, there was anything else you wanted to cover. We can maybe answer a few of the things in the Q&A.
Yeah, there was just one more small thing. I saw a couple questions come through about languages. So there's a few ways that you can tackle it. If there is a translator in the room, then you probably don't actually have to change the input language. I would keep the input language as the language that the clinician is speaking and that the translator is speaking, or else Heidi is subject to the translation of your medical instructions and directions with the patient. But you can change both the input and output language here, right? So the input language is obviously what you're speaking. The output language is, say you want to do something, in Spanish, or, you're speaking in Spanish, but you still want the chart note to be in English. You can change the input language to Spanish here, and then the output language to English. The other thing as well is you can produce those take-home explainers in the language of your choosing, similar to what Jesse was showing you. There's a few different ways I would do it. Just, if I'm doing it randomly right now, I can say, write a patient take, and this is what I'm doing with the Ask AI bar down below here. But I can say, write a patient take home explainer written in non-clinical terms. Please write it in Spanish. And then Heidi will generate this patient take-home explainer in Spanish. The other way you can do it so that it's not as annoying as you having to type it in every single time is you can actually hit create, and you can have a template that is written in a specific language, basically. So I can hit referral letter French. And now that I've selected that template, because it's made, for the French language, it's going to write it in French. Obviously, it doesn't have like an address or telephone number for the person that I'm writing this to, but you can see the rest here is filled out. And now it's just the last thing I wanted to cover. So you can do that in any of the languages that we support, which are all listed here. So I think there's like 35 at this point. So you should hopefully. But yeah, that was it. We can hop to questions.
Yeah, let's maybe hop to questions. There's a lot, so we'll try and I've been keeping a little eye on it. So we'll try and do the ones that are a little bit more generalizable. So someone asks about reviews of systems based on mentioned symptoms and signs. Hopefully what I went through in sort of that physical exam example is great help to being able to tell Heidi, okay, listen for abnormals and only include the information where there is an abnormal. Otherwise, resort to some instruction, whether that's to say not examined, whether that's to exclude the section altogether, whether it's to include some normal statement. Hopefully that is kind of generalizable beyond just the physical exam example that I showed you. I saw a few questions about timestamps. So right now you can't get Heidi to include timestamps on either start times, stop times, or even things like when was this discussed. It is something that we're actually working on internally, so I'd expect that to be done soon, but I know that's really important for things like coding, billing purposes, and so definitely look out for that. Yeah, a few questions around getting our support on templates. So whilst we don't necessarily do sort of one-to-one, hand-to-hand support with templates, we do have a weekly office hours for these sorts of things. We also, depending on sort of where you are and how you're situated, when we work with larger teams, we also are happy to build team templates. So, maybe this will be a moment for me to shill that if you want Heidi for your team, feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to help with team templates and things like that. But highly encourage after this session, maybe sign up for some office hours sessions or things like that. We've got some questions about pulling from other sources. Hopefully the context window that we discussed is really useful there for you to pull in from different pieces and different places, some PDFs, some free text, and get it to kind of summarize together. feel free to jump in, Ishan, if there's any that you see as well. I'm just kind of scrolling.
Yeah, for the other languages, you should be able to verify them yourselves. Just from a medical legal standpoint, you should definitely be sure that you're able to validate it. Is email HIPAA compliant? It depends on the email you're sending to, right? So like we're a healthcare company. Most hospitals have HIPAA compliant email servers, but it would be dependent on your email server.
Yeah. A few questions in here around formatting. So paragraphs, bullet points, lists. Hopefully what we showed, and I can quickly just jump back in to show it off once more. Anything to do with formatting, you're going to use those parentheses, right? So back to this note in here, if I come in and edit this template, what I can do is I can tell Heidi, rather than list for my subjective, write this section in paragraph format, not bullets, right? And then I'm going to apply that change. And then if Heidi plays nice, it will then write that section in the format that I want rather than bullets. So I'll give it a quick second. But now you can see here, the subjective section is no longer in bullets. It's now in a paragraph format. So hopefully that is helpful, that rather than having a specific, button to press, we've given you the flexibility to really kind of tell Heidi any stylistic instructions you want. Just jumping back in.
Maybe the last thing to show, and I could show, would be the memory tab.
Yep.
There's a few questions about things in relation to that. So one other option you have in Heidi is this memory tab here. So you can set the date format. There's one question about that, but you can also select, your default language, and your spelling you should set to US English is what I would imagine. But what you can do here in the replace tab is sometimes you'll find that, Heidi spells my name wrong, until I trained Heidi how to spell my name, but it also can spell maybe some brand names of drugs differently, just because depending on where you're located, a drug can be spelled a bit differently by brand name. So you can see here, I said, instead of put Panaloc, put it like, and spell it like this with 2 O's instead of 2 A's. I've also told it how to spell my name. Sometimes it spells it with 2 A's. These are just like for exaggeration purposes. It doesn't actually do that.
And it would be good, Ishan, maybe if you go to an...
Yeah, I will. The last thing here is some of you might have like quick text, and you can mimic that in your snippet functionality here, right? So I can put in, and I'll just, for the sake of this example, edit this one, but I can type in, okay, the shorthand for crisis consult, when I type that in is I want Heidi to populate this. And this can be as long as you need it to be. It can be, 2-paragraph long. So it'll be like much more useful than what I have here in this example. The way you would then utilize this, as well as these replacements, is if I go into a note, I can utilize the snippets by hitting \, and then I can just click on one. What I can also do is I can hit \, and I can start to type one and hit enter. So now crisis consult just appears with this statement. For that find and replace functionality, if I find that Heidi's, messing something up, like let's say it spelled Jesse's name like this, I can highlight that word and I can click on find and replace in the actual note. So you don't have to worry about trying to do it ahead of time or going into the other tab. You can actually do it on the note itself. You can hit find and replace here, and I can say, okay, write Jesse like this, and then where should we apply this? I'll hit everywhere else forever, and I'll hit replace, and now it changes it, but now it also exists on my memory tab, so it knows to do that from here on out, right? So now it has this Jesse. But yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. Yeah, a few other questions in here that I'm seeing around the page limit on the context window. There's not necessarily a page limit, more kind of a data limit, so to speak. You could upload 20 pages that don't have a lot of data on them, or 2 pages with a lot. Typically, I haven't run into, honestly, the limit yet. I'm sure, Ishan, if you're familiar with what the upper limit of it is, but typically, I would say 10 to 20 documents, you're going to be fine. I can't think of any examples apart from maybe extreme sort of behavioral health or yeah, go ahead, Ishan.
I was just gonna say, I answered somebody's questions. I don't know the exact answer, but like I've worked with providers who are uploading like 75 pages in there. Like to Jesse's point, there's definitely some limit. But I would hope that the limit surpasses the amount of, information you're needing to put into that Heidi context section.
Yeah. A few other sort of themes I'm seeing in the chat are around improvements to the template builder. So we are actively working on a template builder that is going to blow everyone's socks away. So it will be a combination of being able to chat live to the actual template. You know, you create an initial V1 of the template and you tell it, no, actually include this section, and it dynamically does that. But then also you're kind of visualizing the changes anchored against a real note as well. So the template builder and the template kind of infrastructure is going to get a lot sweeter soon. The other thing I'm seeing is around kind of the nature of the output that will be supported. A lot of questions around bolding, HTML, italics, sort of section-wise copying. The editor that the sort of Heidi sits within, where the text streams out, will also get very sophisticated soon, where you'll be able to do proper indented bullet points. You'll be able to do sort of rich text formatting with italics and headings and bolds. And then also another really important thing that comes out of that is for those of you that work in very structured EMRs, the ability to copy very specific sections rather than having to highlight certain sections. That will also come soon. And so lots of exciting things coming soon to the template world. And please send us feedback, and you know, if you're interested in being alpha users, alpha testers of these kinds of things, we want to hear from you. So always reach out to us, feel free. But other than that, I think we can basically call it a wrap. I'll give you three minutes back to have back over lunch. But we'll also send a recording, so feel free to distribute that with colleagues or anything like that. But otherwise, I appreciate you all spending an hour. Hopefully we made it somewhat entertaining. But yeah, awesome. Great to see you all.
Thanks, everybody.